The center of gravity of economic growth clearly moved to China. There is a real understanding in China of the challenge of climate change.
How do we rebrand China?
When they make a promise, they almost always deliver early. So that increase in electricity has all been produced by renewables.
Why hold yourself back using old technology when the future should be, green?
The market system says build new renewable energy systems because they're cheaper than any new fossil fuel-based system.
Hello and welcome. Today's conversation is one I've been both looking forward to and, I have to be honest with you, also dreading. It's December 2024 and we've just lived through another year of staggering climate records. For 15 of the past 16 months, global temperatures have exceeded 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, a threshold once considered a warning, now our new reality. Meanwhile, Antarctic sea ice has plummeted to record lows and Arctic ice is rapidly thinning and shrinking. As climate scientists have long predicted, these shifts are driving more frequent and severe extreme weather events around the globe. Now, few people have been raising the alarm about climate change for as long or as urgently as my guest today, Sir David King. Sir David, as the UK's former chief scientific advisor, you warned in 2004 that climate change posed a greater threat than terrorism, a claim many dismissed. Yet 20 years of mounting evidence has only reinforced your assessment. The world's lack of action in the face of overwhelming evidence led you to found the Climate Crisis Advisory Group in 2021 to accelerate progress on the climate emergency. And that brings us to today's conversation. As global fossil fuel emissions continue to rise and climate records continue to fall, we'll explore the immense challenges we face and the solutions still within our reach. So David, welcome back to the show. Could you reflect back to us CCAG's visit to China this year? Can you tell us the objectives and the successes that came out of the trip? Because I believe you see China as pivotal if we're going to solve this crisis, and what they're doing sounds remarkable at the moment.
Absolutely right. So the first thing I have to say is that we are producing country reports, and we have produced, for example, reports on the United States, on India, on Brazil, and now we produced a report on China. That's our most recent country report. And we traveled as CCAG to China to launch the report in China. We had great assistance from our Chinese member, Qi Ye, and he and his research team really helped us enormously in preparing this report. So the report is very well established in terms of the detail within it. Nobody's going to question us about that. And the report very clearly sets out what China has been doing, particularly since 2012, on the issue of climate change, but most particularly on the issue of leaving coal in the ground. That's their major objective. And in 2012, they announced this, that they would really reduce their dependence on coal very dramatically going forward in time. However, and this is very important to understand, between 2000 and 2020, the estimate is that between 800 and 850 million people were taken out of poverty in China. So this very rapid economic growth that's never been seen before, of 10 to 12% per annum for much of that period, really spread out into human well-being across the country. And the result is, of course, that you've got a new middle class that are demanding more and more electricity. And so moving forward, from 2013 onwards, what we show is that China's usage of coal has not diminished. It's plateaued, but it hasn't diminished. But the demand for electricity since 2012 has doubled. And so that increase in electricity has all been produced by renewables and by a big program of nuclear power building, and also, of course, hydropower. So they are producing most of their electricity now from non-fossil fuel sources. But of course, they are very, very keen to see that they reduce their dependency on coal as it continues today. And so while we were there and presenting our report to some very senior people, around the table was a chap who is involved heavily in overseeing this operation. And he said to us, well, let me just tell you that in the last 12 months in China, we have added to 330 gigawatts of electricity onto our grid from solar power alone, from sunlight alone. And that's in the more arid area in the northwest of the country. Now, of course, think of that. That's more than three times the grid capacity of the United Kingdom. Right, so we're talking about in 12 months just from solar energy. And this is what we see throughout China. We did a tour around China, and we were very graciously received by people wherever we went. But the most important thing is just to see the nature of this country emerging over the last 25 years. It is a modern country in every respect. You feel as if you're visiting the future when you come to China. And I imagine that people coming to London back in the years 1905, thereabouts, must have felt that about London. So I'm just saying the center of gravity of economic growth clearly moved to China, and that is apparent. But they have committed themselves to move away from dependence on fossil fuel. There is a real understanding in China of the challenge of climate change. And of course, the beauty of the Chinese system is once that understanding is in place, they set the targets and deliver. And one thing about China, and I referred to comments that Arunabha Ghosh has made, when they make a promise, they almost always deliver early. Right, so their promises are made on a massive analysis, and they deliver. So I think what we saw was simply remarkable. For example, in Guangzhou, which is the area which includes now Macau and Hong Kong, it's this big Bay Area. In that area, they've set up a new Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, brackets Guangzhou. And this new institution was dreamt up 5 years ago. It now covers 111 hectares of land, and the buildings are simply remarkable. They've got an American architect in who's designed these wonderful buildings for this new institution. And the object is, at least in a good part, to provide the science and technology backup to this new non-fossil fuel world and to manage the challenges of climate change. Now, I think our report, which has been heavily reviewed in much of the press around the world, I would say the United States, not good coverage, but that may be a problem that we have to tackle. But nevertheless, this report sets out a vision of China's leadership on climate change that is not well understood around the world.
I think this is fascinating, absolutely fascinating what you've said there about China. Maybe I'll push back slightly in one respect, in terms of one, what's happening in China, this revolution doesn't seem to be it's not understood by the rest of the world. I often hear people saying that China is the problem, not the solution, and that they are one of the biggest emitters. But also from outsider watching the COP process, it also feels like China play heavily on pushing back on progress in the COP process as well. So I don't have facts for this. All I have is what I see, and I feel like a lot of the public see it that way. So how do we rebrand China? How do we make sure that people see what China's doing in a positive light?
We of course have to be very careful about spreading rumors of the kind you've just been stating there. There is not one word of truth in any of that, and we need to understand China is now playing a leadership role in the sense of setting an example for others. It's not behaving, and they have made this very clear. We do not want to be seen as hoping to be the world's next hegemon. We do not want to replace the United States as an apparent world leader. But what we are going to do is set an example for others to follow. There's something rather modest about that position, but we now set about. I had an enormously helpful discussion with Minister Xie Zhenhua, who was the climate negotiator for China in 2015 when I was UK Foreign Office's negotiator for climate change. And so we got to know each other then. Now, this meeting with Xie Zhenhua, what we were discussing was we want to avoid anything getting worse. We must see that everything gets a whole lot better, that countries around the world really focus now on action. And so we have initiated that process. I've had a Chinese visit very recently over here. Xie Zhenhua came to London. He's been to Paris. He's meeting heads of governments, heads of the European Union. And I'm talking to other countries that we were talking about. We want to see willing nations step forward and make commitments, new commitments beyond any commitments they've made before, and then deliver. So they need to make commitments and deliver on those commitments. Once again, following the Chinese example and setting examples for others. Now, that particular grouping includes Brazil. President Lula is very, very keen to see that the Brazil COP is different. Now, I'm not suggesting that 196 nations are going to suddenly deliver in a COP meeting in a way that we haven't delivered before. But I am suggesting it's a venue where the countries that are really delivering what is needed can expose other countries to that and hope that they will follow suit, or else criticize other countries if they're not. So I think the objective is set, for example, by the British Prime Minister on the first day of the Baku meeting, the recent COP meeting. He announced that Britain would reduce its emissions by 81% by 2035. Now, that's going beyond what Britain had committed before. It's doing exactly what I'm saying. And he also said, and we plan to work closely with China. Right, so this is completely contrary from the statements we've been getting, particularly from the United States. So what now? I believe the European Union will follow suit. Certainly, France is with us on this. I believe what we're going to see is rolling forward in time, countries stepping forward and saying we are going to deliver what is needed.
You've touched upon it earlier, and this is about the approach of COP30 and the whole process of COP. What I'd like to know is what your thoughts are. What do you think needs to change to ensure that COP is more effective, and that COP30 is more effective than COP29? And what would a truly successful outcome look like at COP30?
So let me take this as a very general question about the COP process. The COP process is involved with something like 4,000 negotiators from 196 nations, just an absurd number of negotiators. Really difficult to see how you ever reach agreement. And then if you also see the COP process with another 4,000, no, maybe I'm exaggerating, 2,000 people from the fossil fuel industry coming to try and stop any action, right? So we've got this big to and fro. And we even had the last two COP meetings in oil producing countries where their entire GDP is based on oil production. It looks as if the COP process had been captured by the fossil fuel lobby. So I just want to say, when we come to COP meetings, they are not usually productive in the decision making and the actions that flow. But those meetings are a great meeting place for those who want to see action to happen. I don't think we need to be over pessimistic about what the situation. So let me say what I want to say there. Back in the period when I began working with Tony Blair, we introduced this policy that all of our electricity utilities had to use a certain minimum percentage of renewables in their electricity production. If they put electricity onto the grid, a certain percentage had to be from renewables, otherwise there were penalties. And they all delivered because they passed the cost on to the customer. They didn't suffer. So that was all right. But what we did at that point in time, the cost of producing electricity from renewables was perhaps 10 times as much per kilowatt hour than it was from the existing fossil fuel-based systems, because this new industry had no maturity at all. And so, however, right across Europe, there were countries doing very similar things. And so this created a big new market for renewables. As that market grew, the cost collapsed. And so what we see today is that for much of the world, the market system says build new renewable energy systems because they're cheaper than any new fossil fuel-based system. So the free market is actually delivering now across the world. International Energy Agency says more than 50% of new electricity production around the world is already from renewables. And that is not all delivered by countries trying to act on climate change. That's the free market operating. Texas, for example, an anti-climate change state, has more than 50% of its electricity from wind farms. There's a sort of irony there, but that's just the economy driving it through. You've got a piece of arid land, put up some wind turbines and put electricity into the grid and you make money.
I always remember your words from previous CCAG meetings, which is not to produce stranded assets. Why hold yourself back using old technology when the future should be, green? It should be clean energy. One of the things that we talk about a lot on our CCAG meetings are the 4Rs. It's the CCAG's 4Rs. Could you remind people of what the CCAG's 4Rs are, and tell us what you think global leaders can learn from CCAG's 4Rs, and plan its strategy to accelerate the transition to a sustainable future?
So a very quick statement about the current state of the world. Yes, we're having extreme weather events of an extremity that we've never had before in most parts of the world. And this is driven not only by rising temperatures. You've just said 1.5. Actually, we've exceeded 1.6 on average for the last 12 months. Why are these high temperatures suddenly appearing? And also, why these extreme weather events occurring around the planet? Now, one of the reasons is because the two poles are losing ice. You mentioned the amount of ice lost from Antarctica. 50% of sea ice around Antarctica was lost in 1 year, 2023, and in the Arctic Circle region as well. Now, these two poles are critically important because ice reflects sunlight back into space. The blue sea soaks it up. So what I'm saying is the challenges are so severe with us now that we can no longer hope to manage this simply by moving away from fossil fuels. Yes, we must stop using fossil fuels. We're adding 40 billion tons a year of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. This is not sustainable in any way. So we have to do that. So the first is reduce emissions deeply and rapidly, the first of the 4Rs. The second R is we have to remove the excess greenhouse gases that we've already put up there. Why do I say that? We used to talk about having a carbon budget remaining. That was the discussion in Paris in 2015. We had a carbon budget remaining, meaning that humanity would be surviving and manageable going forward, even if we only move away from the use of fossil fuels. today, that's no longer true because tipping points are already happening or close to happening. Right, so the tipping loss of ice at the poles is severe. The tipping loss of ice in the Himalayas is severe. So what we're seeing are these new challenges, which is the so-called albedo of the Earth, the reflectivity of sunlight from the Earth. That's changing dramatically. And in particular, around the North Pole, when the sun comes in the summer and warms up that sea around the North Pole, the consequences are very severe. So, yes, we have to remove excess greenhouse gases. I'm going to talk about parts per million. The pre-industrial level, we were at 275 parts per million. Today, we're at over 500 parts per million. That's including methane, and we need to get it down to less than 350. Let me come to
parts per million of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere.
Yes.
Yeah.
We need to be less than 350 for a sustainable future for humanity. That's a big ask to remove all that. It's going to take us to the end of the century at best to get to that level. So how do we buy time? We've got to buy time by refreezing the two poles, for example. So we need to repair the broken parts of the climate system to buy time to enable us to reduce emissions and also to remove excess greenhouse gases. The fourth R is critically important, and that is resilience. Each part of the world must develop resilience to the changes in the climate system that are happening in their vicinity. Every city in the world is faced with that challenge, but for each city, that challenge is different. It depends on where you are. You may be faced with more and more droughts. You may be faced with more and more massive downpours of rain. Every part of the world, but we can also inform people from the very good climate models we have as to what challenges are coming to each part of the world. So resilience must be installed in each part of the world so that humanity can get through this period.
Very, very important words. Reduce, remove, repair, resilience. That's CCAG's 4 Rs. Before we wrap up, Sir David, I'd like to end with a quick fire round. I think you know how this works. I'm going to start with a sentence and I'd love you to finish it with whatever comes to mind. Are you ready for this, Sir David?
Okay.
Okay. The biggest misconception about the climate crisis is
that we can spend decades getting all of the systems right and we will still be fine. In other words, the big misconception is a lack of understanding that we are already past that point. We have many, many things we have to do to create a manageable future.
massive misconception. Totally agree with you on that one. A New Year's climate resolution we should all have is
Stop eating beef.
totally agree with you on that one. I've been there talking about that for a long, long time. Absolutely, because of the impacts that beef production has on the climate. So David King, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your unwavering commitment to tackling the climate crisis. It's clear that while the challenges are immense, so too are the opportunities for action. And to our viewers, if today's conversation resonated with you, let it be a call to action, because solving the climate crisis is a responsibility that we all have to share. Thank you and goodbye.